Welcome to Tape. Rory, we are ready to do this for real. The 1920 season is here. That means despite all the people in your department who complain to you about this, not mentioning any names.
I'm doing it for the people out there. Everybody wants
predictions. Everyone wants predictions except the people who have to make them. I don't mind. I think it's a fun game. I assume everyone knows not to hold it against us.
This episode will self-destruct.
When we go over 16 on our playoff picks. But yes, today we are laying it out. Yep. We're going to pick 8 teams to make the playoffs in the East, 8 to make the playoffs in the West.
Yep.
We will, of course, give a West and East winner and a Stanley Cup winner as well. We're also going to get a Stanley Cup winner from Luke Fox, who's mostly going to talk about the team he covers, the Toronto Maple Leafs, but he's going to give us his prediction for a Cup winner and 3 what we're calling crazy yet reasonable thoughts.
Realistic.
Yeah,
in
within the realm of possibility,
yes,
and we'll give some thoughts on that too on in the final segment. But let's dive right into it. We'll start with the East, and we'll start here.
All right.
Out of the 16 teams in the East, I would say there are 2 I'd be comfortable betting my life don't make the playoffs. Ottawa and Detroit. Would you add another team to that list?
Boy, Columbus. I would feel pretty good. Yeah, I mean, I just, with the Rangers and Devils making the additions, the improvements that they did already, it's getting tough. And Columbus, I don't think is going to be as bad as Ottawa and Detroit necessarily.
Don't step on my crazy but reasonable thoughts.
Okay. See, I was thinking about going that way too, but they really don't have goaltending. They have no certainty in net whatsoever, right? Like, I still like what they have on the blue line to start with. I like some of the forwards they have, Atkinson and Dubois, but I just think, like, with the goalies that they have with almost zero NHL experience, very, very little, it's going to be hard for them to not only stay where they were last year, but stay ahead of the teams that are making up ground behind them. Like, Philadelphia is a team I want to feel good about this year too, as well. So, it's just, how do you finish in the top 4 or 5 in that division? I feel confident Columbus is going to finish out.
All right, then who's in Eastern Conference? Go.
You want to go down by division? How do you want to do this?
Just tell me your 8 playoff teams. If you want to divide it up, go for it.
Okay, so I'm going to go Tampa Bay, Toronto, Boston, Montreal, I want to put in, Washington, Carolina, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia. I've been so on the fence about what I want to do, with that wild card, but I am going to go with Philadelphia instead of
4 and 4. I actually had Philadelphia written in, deleted, and put Florida in. I have Washington, Carolina, Tampa Bay, Pittsburgh, Boston, Toronto, Florida. So I guess if I was going to put them in order just for the sake of dividing them up, I would say Washington, Carolina, Pittsburgh, and Tampa Bay, Boston, Toronto, Florida. So what do you like about the Flyers?
I just think that really there were 2 things that really held them back last year. The power play was putrid. But Alain Vigneault had a pretty good track record with the Rangers of keeping that team's power play in the top half of the league, which if Philadelphia can do that, and look at the talent they have, right? You have Couturier, you have Giroux, you have Voracek. On defense, you have Gostisbehere. The big knock on Provorov, or what's prevented him from really accelerating into Norris discussion, or at least points-wise getting up there into the elite, is he really has never produced very well on the power play, and I got to believe that's going to come eventually with the shot he has. So I think that's going to improve, and then the goaltending, which I feel is pretty well solved with Carter Hart finally arriving. I mean, there is some proving for him to do. He's still very, very young, and that's a tough position to step into at such a young age and be effective, but he feels like a bit of an anomaly in that. He's going to stand out. He's going to be different than the norm. So I think with the 2 upgrades I see in those 2 departments, that Philadelphia is a pretty good bet to get back into the playoffs. And they've been alternating in and out for the last few years, and this would be the year they would get back in
again. New coach boost. Are you worried about Pittsburgh at all? And do you think the only thing that can undo Carolina is goaltending?
Yes. No and yes. I'm
Okay.
not really worried about Pittsburgh. I actually believe that Malkin is going to have a massive year. I mean, in our pool, our fantasy pool, he was a target of mine because I just feel like he's going to come in with a bit of a chip on his shoulder this year. When Evgeny Malkin wants to, he can be one of the best players in the NHL. And I feel like this is a year that he gets back up over 100 points, maybe takes a run at the Art Ross or something crazy like that. And with Carolina, yeah, I mean, their defense is stellar. You lose Falk, but I think that just means more minutes, more power play time for Dougie Hamilton. Joel Edmondson is a good kind of anchor, stay-at-home guy to kind of stabilize that. The additions they made on forward, I mean, I love Eric Halla. I think Andrei Svechnikov is just going to keep getting better and better as a goal scorer there. I almost didn't want to put Carolina in the playoffs because I cannot rely on Peter Mrazek.
Yeah.
Really can't. Like, it's entirely possible that neither of their goalies has a 900 save percentage even this year. And if that happens, that's kind of going the way of the Florida Panthers last year, who were a top 10 offense, but second last in save percentage, and they missed the playoffs. So that's a way that this can kind of all crumble around the Carolina Hurricanes this year. Didn't really happen last year. They were able to get through it, but I can't bet on Mrazek having 2 decent seasons in a row.
You don't think Reimer's got bounce back potential?
Reimer had so many chances to be the number 1 in Florida when Luongo went down to injuries, and he himself couldn't stay healthy, or he just wasn't capable. Like, he couldn't be consistent enough to take over that job. So if something happens with Mrazek, whether it's injury or performance, I have absolutely no faith that Reimer is going to be the one who takes that flag and runs with it.
All right, so you think Montreal's getting in? We're going to talk a lot about the Leafs with Luke, so we'll pass over them for now. But you think the Canadians are getting in, building on a surprise season last year?
Yeah, and that's partly because, a large part, because in the predictions piece on Sportsnet.ca, my Vezina pick is Carey Price. Every year that he's been healthy from beginning to end, he's been phenomenal, one of the best goalies in the NHL, in the world. And kind of what got him away from that discussion was the injuries and the shortened seasons that he's had to deal with over the last few years. So I'm not going to bet on him getting an injury or anything like that. I'm going to bet on him being able to stay healthy this year. And he is only 30. You know, you're getting to the back half, but you're not at this point yet where you should start falling off a cliff.
Yeah.
I think he's got a number of years ahead of him.
Roberto Luongo and Henrik Lundqvist, good goalies, 37, 38 years old.
So if Carey Price wins the Vezina, or is that good to be a Vezina finalist, I think that alone is going to be enough to really carry the Canadians very far. I mean, they almost got into the playoffs last year, right? So if Carey Price just gets to a little bit of another level, I think that should be enough to get them in. I think you're going to see some development from guys like Suzuki. Kotkaniemi should just be a little bit better. I think Poehling is going to end up on this team, even though he's not there to start the season, and that should provide a bit of a difference too. I think they'll find a way to find enough offense to help them out. But for me, the crux of this is Carey Price just being amazing this year.
So neither of us have Ottawa anywhere near the playoffs. But do you think the Sens are going to be kind of a fun team to watch at times this year?
I mean, there's like they were last year at the start of the year, like Chicago was kind of after Jeremy Colton got hired, and they just didn't care about defense anymore. They were fun to watch, but they weren't going to be winning any games. I think Ottawa is a team that it will be fun to see what Eric Brandstrom does. It'll be fun to see what Thomas Chabot, Brady Tkachuk, what do these guys do as they kind of grow as NHLers, but that's not really a recipe for winning. You need some semblance of defense, and I don't really think they're there yet. I think Craig Anderson could very well be a trade candidate at some point this year. And when he's gone too, again, there's a huge question mark in net and what happens. There's some guys that could potentially work their way in as number ones somewhere down the line, but too many holes, too many young guys, not enough defense. They're going to be bottom of the East, I think, for sure.
All right, over to the West. I'll start with the same question.
Okay.
I have LA is the only team I bet my life on that doesn't get in. Do you want to add a team to that list?
I'm really, really tempted to say Edmonton, but I'm not going to bet my life on that.
Don't do that to yourself.
Because of Connor McDavid.
Yeah, that's right.
No, and that's it, right? Yeah, so I would stick with the one team.
Yeah,
LA.
okay.
Yeah.
All right, so break it down for me. Who do you have going in the imbalanced West? Because the Central, I mean, same as the East, the Atlantic is so much better than the Metro, or at least at the top.
Yep.
Have to say the same about the Central.
It's really hard on the wild cards in this one. So let's do the three from each division first. Colorado, Nashville, Dallas, in that order.
Okay.
Vegas, encroaching a little bit on my bold pick here a bit. Arizona, second, and Calgary, third. And now this is where I'm really tricky because I always thought, well, you got to have 5 teams from the Central coming out here. And now I'm going to go with St. Louis for the first wild card.
Okay.
I think they have to get back in. I really like Anaheim's bounce back chances here. I'm going to go with Anaheim, and that means I'm leaving Winnipeg on the outside.
Winnipeg on the outside looking
But
in.
again, this is where I've kind of been back and forth because it seems crazy to leave Winnipeg out. But obviously, there's some huge concerns on that blue line if Dustin Byfuglien doesn't return. If he does, it helps it a little bit. But I don't know if I'm even ready to buy into Connor Hellebuck being able to steady that with the questions on defense. Love their offense, but there's a lot of teams that you can say that about too. So right now on this show, I'm going with Anaheim over Winnipeg for the playoffs.
Calgary, what do you see for a team that was able to take care of business with Matthew Tkachuk before it dragged into the year? Big time disappointment for the Flames after winning the Pacific, going out to the Colorado Avalanche. I mean, as it turns out, probably no shame in that given where the Avs are, but clearly this team wants to go a lot farther than it did.
Yeah, clearly. And I think I'm not crazy about some of the additions they made, like Milan Lucic, Zach Ronaldo. These guys aren't going to help you put pucks in the net, right? There's not enough offense there. But I think those kind of additions are made with playoffs in mind, because if you see what St. Louis did last year, they kind of brought back this idea of big boy hockey being a thing, right? Being a factor you needed on your roster in the playoffs. So I'm not going to really hold it too much against Calgary bringing in these guys. James Neal obviously was not working, so whatever. But it also kind of takes that expectation, I guess, or that focus off of Matthew Tkachuk, that he doesn't have to be the mouth and the guy who has to toss the fists or answer physically. Lucic and Ronaldo can kind of take that a little bit too. I just think I have them taking a little bit of a step back in the regular season because the goalies are still a question mark. I like Riddick, but I don't know if over 82 games that situation is going to be enough to win a division with what else is going on around them there. I think we saw the best season, as we mentioned on the top 50 ranking, of Mark Giordano's career last year. I don't see him putting up those same kind of point totals, and that's going to have an effect on TJ Brody and some of those other blue liners on Calgary too. And I wonder if Matthew Tkachuk can put up the same point totals or not as last year, and if he doesn't, your secondary scoring is going to take a little bit of a hit. There's been some talk of maybe eventually trying Lindholm as a second-line center, and if you do that, his offensive ceiling takes a major hit because the only reason he really broke out last year finally was because he was alongside Sean Monahan and Johnny Gaudreau. So there's just there's a little bit of uncertainty there, and I feel better about some of the other teams in the Pacific who I have finishing higher than Calgary. Not that I think they're going to miss the playoffs. I think they're a very good bet to get there, and then the physicality aspect becomes a little bit more of a factor. I wonder if that helps them even a little bit in the playoffs, but I'll worry about that when we get there. I feel a little bit softer on them in the regular season this year.
I had Vancouver as my disappointment team in our predictions.
Yep.
And then I was looking closer and I thought, I don't know. You know what?
Yep.
It's not that hard to see things going right. And Markstrom's been pretty okay for a couple years now, right? And that's kind of what was in my head, was that, was also disappointing relative to growing expectations. But you add Tyler Myers to the blue line, you add Quinn Hughes to the blue line, you get year 2 for Elias Pettersson, and you hope for a fully healthy Brock Besser.
Yep.
This team could be knocking on the door.
Yeah, you touched on some of the defensemen there, and you keep Edler. You still have Chris Tanev, and I know these guys have injury concerns and whatever. You're probably going to be without them for some spots. But there's a little bit more depth there than there was before. I mean, there's not a ton. I mean, Olio Levy probably gets a call up if injuries hit at some point, and that's probably a little bit overdue, or at least you want to see what he's capable of at the NHL level. But you have that to call on now. You have a third pair that's probably better than it was a year ago. So that in itself will will bring you along a little bit better. And I love the forwards that they have. Obviously, Pettersson could just blow up this year and have that McDavid light effect on Vancouver. And if Besser hits, he's a candidate for 40 goals.
How many Furlan going to get if he's playing up there? He could be 30, right?
And we've seen it before when he's been paired with good line mates in Calgary. He had pretty good years, right? Like, not only he's going to be a point-a-game player or anything like that, you'd never expect it. But again, he'll bring that physicality, and he will bring that net front presence and the ability to kind of overshoot the expectations for points. So, when you're talking about Vancouver and Edmonton, both teams that are rebuilding, not quite where they want to get to yet, possibly both of them, or one of them makes the playoffs. I don't think both of them make the playoffs. Yeah. Possibly one of them does. I think the safer bet is actually Vancouver.
I was gonna open with that with these two teams. Yeah.
Like,
crazy.
There's so many. Who's going to play the wing on Edmonton, right? That's the big thing. And do you have to split up the three centers so you have three lines instead of putting Draisaitl with McDavid all the time? That's the big storyline there. But if you split them up, I mean, you have to have James Neal hitting 20 goals, which he only got 7 last year. I had him on the over. I have him getting over 20 goals on the predictions this year. But even if he does that, who else? Yeah. Like, there's nothing. It's a wasteland on the wings.
All right. Well, you can go check out all those predictions on sportsnet.ca. Some done against their will, but they did it anyways.
Yes. Thank you.
So let's put a bow on this before we go. In the East, I have in the Metro, Washington, Carolina, Pittsburgh, and the Flyers. Flyers being the wild card team. And in the Atlantic, I have Toronto, Tampa Bay. I have Florida third, actually, and I'll give the wild card to Boston just because I think Florida is going to be pushing hard to get in there. And in the West, I have Nashville, the Dallas Stars, the Winnipeg Jets, the Avalanche, and St. Louis as the 5th Central team getting in. And the 3 Pacific teams I think will make the playoffs are Vegas, Calgary, and San Jose. What have you got?
So, division by division, Washington, Carolina, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia. I think we matched up there.
Yeah, we did.
New Jersey, the Islanders, the Rangers, and Columbus.
Then, all out, yeah.
Yes. And then, Philadelphia is the wild card. Tampa, Toronto, Boston, Montreal is the wild card. Florida just out. They're my disappointment team. And I feel even if they just get a wild card spot, that's a little bit of a disappointment. They're my disappointment team because the expectations are so through the roof. I feel they can only disappoint this year, right? Buffalo, Detroit, and Ottawa. And in the West, I have Colorado, Nashville, Dallas, St. Louis, Winnipeg, Chicago, Minnesota, Vegas, Arizona, Calgary, Anaheim, San Jose, Vancouver, Edmonton, Los Angeles.
Okay. When we come back, Luke Fox will join us, and we're going to talk a lot of Leafs and get some predictions from him. He has always has some great thoughts on the season, so we'll see what Luke is seeing as he peers into the crystal ball. Coming up next on Tape to Tape. We are back. Pleased to be joined now by Luke Fox, Sportsnet's on the ground Leafs writer, general league writer, all kinds of things. But we're going to talk about the Leafs on the eve of this season. So before we jump into what you see coming, why don't you just put a bow on training camp? Big takeaways. Obviously, Rasmus Sandin was, emerged as the story early on. But what are your takeaways from Leafs camp?
Well, in general, I feel like there was so much off-ice chatter about, criticism of the Mitch Marner contract and how much he got overpaid compared to some of the other wingers in the league. And, of course, the Austin Matthews fiasco, that what was lost was how good this team looked. I mean, once they, divided the AHL squad from the real NHL squad, they were just dominant playing against their 2 games against the Red Wings and Canadians. Freddie Anderson didn't even let in a goal in those games. The defense looks way better with Tyson Barrie at it. Had a good conversation with Jake Muzzin and how comfortable he is, the fact that he's here from day one as opposed to being parachuted in. I think it was quite an adjustment for him last year. So the fact that, his family settled here and he's ready to go, I think that's huge. So the blue line, which is the glaring weakness, looks way better. And the stars look better. Like William Nylander looks fantastic. Austin Matthews looks even better than he did before. He got 8 points in 4 preseason games. And of course it's exhibition, But the fact is, this team is rolling into opening night looking really good on the ice.
It's really easy to see Matthews and Nylander having monster years.
Yeah, I mean, the fun debate for fans would be who can get more points, the Tavares-Marner duo, which did last year, or Nylander-Matthews, which just looks back to normal, back to where they should be.
On Nylander, like I was having a conversation with a friend about the contracts in Toronto, and like, was it an overpay for Matthews given you only got him for 5 years? I mean, he's an elite center. Maybe you can get an extra year or two, but it's not a bad contract. Marner was, an overpay in regards to how it matches up against the rest of the RFA class. Tavares, that's how you get a guy like that off the free agent market, right? So they're not really a lot of overpays going on there. But then I feel like Nylander also gets lumped into this because the four of them together make up that nice round $40 million cap hit. But I think this is the year where you kind of realize, oh, geez, Nylander's contract's actually going to be a good value, less than $7 million, because he's coming in after a full training camp. He's going to be starting game one as opposed to joining the team in December. Like, I don't know. What do you feel about Nylander? I feel like this is the year he's really going to pop as a player.
Well, he should. And I think, a couple things. I think him going to the World Championships and ending his personal season on a positive note, even though the Leafs season ended on another sour note, very familiar one with Game 7 loss in Boston. But for him personally, he went into his summer on a bit of a high because he looked so dynamic at the Worlds, and kind of, instead of the last image of hockey for him being a Game 7 loss and playing center where he's, not quite as effective as he is, complimenting Matthews on the wing and all that, I think that helped his confidence a lot. And just speaking to him every day or every other day, he's just so confident. It's like, you kind of wish you had that. Like, nothing bothers him, and he's just so positive and sure in his abilities. And he just kind of has a little bit more swagger about him. And contract wise, I think if you just looked at the number, it's fine. I think it's just the timing of it, skewed everyone's, kind of vision on where it fits. Because if he had signed the same contract in August, I don't think there'd be so much belly aching. It's just the fact that they dragged it on, and then he still got something that he probably could have got a couple months earlier.
And then had an awful year. Right?
Yeah, and then had an awful year, yeah.
You mentioned Barrie. Let's talk about the D. It's been, I guess you'd have to call it the Leafs' Achilles heel during the Matthews-Marner era. So right now, Barrie, Muzzin is written in stone. Another newcomer, Cody Ceci, on the right side with Morgan Riley. And now you've got Sandin in the mix and Travis Dermott coming back probably a month or so into the season. Long term, how do you see things playing out in terms of pairings? And I'll throw one at you that got thrown at me on the radio the other day. Do you think there's a chance or a good chance that Ceci falls out of the top four and someone pushes him out? How do you see things going over the next few months? I
think there's a chance, but I think Babcock's had this in his mind that he really wants a righty-lefty split. Like, I think part of the reason is kind of like Dubas knows that the coach wants that. He went out and got that. He found two capable right shot defensemen to play with the lefties in Riley and Muzzin. So it's kind of like, it's on you now. Here you go. You wanted your perfect balance. You have it. Now make it work. So I think Babcock will stick with the top four as is for a while, and give CC and Muzzin and Barrie, like, these new combinations, time to gel. That said, if, say, CC looks horrible and Sandin is just looking fantastic, I've talked to him, he's comfortable playing either side, there is a chance. But I think they'll give it a good month or two before they start to consider that. But when you bring when Dermott's finally healthy, it's not a bad top six.
It's not, and I was even thinking long term here. Like, let's say for salary cap purposes, they have to let go of Barrie and Muzzin and Ceci next year. Well, that's a blow, obviously, but you wonder if Riley, Sandin, and Dermott actually forms the spine of a decent top 6 moving forward. I mean, this is the whole thing, is if you're going to pay these guys, you have to draft well. And now they've already demonstrated they found a guy at the end of the first round. I mean, he hasn't played an NHL game yet. We can't speak with great certainty, but 18 months after they've drafted him, he looks ready for the NHL. That's how you make this paying your top end guys work, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that has to be the plan. Of those 3, I don't know if they can keep one, maybe one.
Yeah, maybe. Like those guys are probably gone.
Yeah.
And what Dubas has done, looking for the value forwards on the fourth lines, the Spetzes, the Patan who was waived, the Ennises last year, you kind of now probably fill in the defense around Riley, Sandin, and Dermott, I would think.
Yeah. Now what's interesting is that Dermott's RFA at the end of the year,
Right.
so he needs a raise. So that's probably your priority, and then you hope that maybe CC gets rejuvenated here. I mean, a guy like Barry, it would be hard to envision him re-signing just because of the math, not because he doesn't like it here or they don't like him, but if he is as good as he looks, he could threaten 60 points and command $8 million, or and then like how do you possibly fit him in? So you're banking on Sandin getting great use out of him when he's still on his entry level. Hopefully Dermott doesn't break the bank on his RFA contract, and then you're hoping a guy like Liljegren or someone in the Marlies
takes another
step. Not this season, but is ready for next September. Yeah.
On Liljegren, do you think Liljegren is still going to be an NHL defenseman? Like, this guy was the number 2 ranked prospect in his draft year, and then he got mono, and there was a whole bunch of complications with that, and he fell down to the Leafs. But he hasn't really built on anything. I know he's on the team to start the season, but that seems more of a cap move than him earning a spot on the team, and he'll be back down with the Marlies before long. But I mean, he underwhelmed in training camps by all reports. Do you think he still is a guy who will eventually be an NHL defenseman?
I think he absolutely...
They have to be. He has to be almost, right? Because of the money.
I think he absolutely has a shot. The fact that he holds his stick right helps his case. He's not there yet, and I think he's gotten a bit of some negativity is spilled onto him just because Sandin has been so awesome and taken off so much that he's kind of left this guy in his wake. So people are a little bit down on him, but you have to remember he's 20 years old. Generally, defensemen come into their own, closer to their mid-20s. So, give him some time. I talked to Sheldon Keefe about him a couple times last year, and he saw a big growth from his rookie year with the Marlies to last year. And he also was dealing with a high ankle sprain. So, if he's healthy, I could see him getting back on track. But, Sandin has definitely, cleared him. So we'll see. The short answer is we don't really know. But I would say don't give him up on him yet because he's only 20 years old. And I had a chat with him yesterday, and confidence is also an issue, almost more so than talent. So he just needs to get feeling good about himself at the farm club level, and we'll see.
So would you say there are any major questions hanging over the Leafs this season? I mean, when you look at the roster top to bottom, is it just kind of, locked and loaded and let's see what happens come playoff time?
Yeah, I think they're not certain on the backup goaltender. I think Hutchinson's fine, but there's a reason they brought in Neuwirth to try out. They're not completely satisfied with their goaltending depth. You could say it about most teams that if their starting goaltender gets injured, they're in trouble. But I think the Leafs might be in more trouble than most. They just depend on Freddie more than anyone. No goaltenders played more hockey than Frederik Andersen since he joined Toronto in the whole league. And Babcock is really reluctant to monitor his workload too much because he wants to get into the playoffs and he wants to have home ice in the playoffs.
Well, I was going to say, I think he, this year especially, and I'd be curious to get your take, really wants to win the division so that ideally you can avoid a scenario where you have to go through Boston and Tampa Bay to get out of the Atlantic.
Yeah, and there is a belief in the organization that if they had Game 7 at home, if they had an extra home game, maybe they win the series.
Or you could have just won Game 6 at home. But.
Yeah, they could have won Game 6 at home. They should have won Game 6 at home. So you just hope that these are learning experiences, and this is what good teams have to do. Like, Washington went through it, St. Louis went through it. Like, most teams lose a bunch before they finally win, and that's kind of the philosophical thinking amongst Kyle Dubas and Babcock, that these are growing pains.
Sure.
They're going to get stronger. But I will never forget talking to Patrick Marleau after that Game 7 loss, and I asked him, like, what's wrong with this team? Like, why can't this team get over the hump? And he's like, it's the killer instinct. We just don't have the killer instinct yet. And, that maybe that comes with time, and they certainly have the talent, because it's kind of these other things,
Yeah.
and Boston had that.
Yeah. Given the pains they kind of went through to give Babcock the righty-lefty split on the back end, the money that they spent on these guys, which really has kind of defined a window here for the Leafs to go at the Stanley Cup, and this might be their best chance even this year. And if he rides Anderson again to a really high games played number, how on the hot seat do you think Babcock is this year, and how far do the Leafs have to go to take him off of it?
I would say that, I think they have to win a round minimum. It doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter who they draw. Like, they could draw Tampa, and Tampa could be the President's Trophy winners again by a mile and not have home ice. But if they don't win a round, I would think he's done.
Right.
Like, at a certain point, yes, he has the pedigree. He's, by all accounts, players are blown away by his preparation, and he practices, runs a really tight practice that guys respect. But at some point, results matter.
Yeah.
You got to win.
Yeah.
So I think the only other way is if they really struggle out of the gate for some reason,
right,
and like start tumbling, then I think the Heat could get cranked. But as long as they're in the mix, I think he gets a shot to see what he can do in the playoffs.
So where do you think this team goes? What's the story of this season for them?
I'm optimistic, just because of how good they look in camp. The fact they finally addressed the blue line, like in Barry and Riley, you have two of the top, 8, 10 offensive defensemen in the whole world.
Guys who just fly.
Like, watching Barry, even though it's obviously just camp, but he's a difference maker.
Yeah.
And now that the defense is more dynamic too, because the book on the Leafs was just dump it into the right side. That's their weak spot. Now they have more balance, and if these pairings aren't working, they can mix them up a little bit more. Like, there's just more flexibility on the back end, and we'll see. But Sandin looks like the real deal too. So I have high hopes for them. Like, we were asked to do our predictions, and I had them coming out of the East. I think it's time for this group to do something.
All right, well, let's zoom out a little bit on that note. People can go to sportsnet.ca and read your piece now about the 20 people who will most influence the 1920 season. Before you came on, we asked you to prepare some, what we're calling crazy yet reasonable predictions for this season. So have you got a few thoughts for the viewers and listeners out there?
Yeah. One I have is that Alex Pietrangelo will no longer be a member of the St. Louis Blues.
Season, before the season ends?
If they falter, like if they have a chance to repeat, like if they're in the mix, then they're not going to be a seller, and it'll happen after the season. But if they falter, it could happen in season.
You think the Falk trade signaled that?
I think so.
Yeah.
And like, how would you feel if you're the captain of the team, you're right shot, used to playing power play, and then all of a sudden they trade for a guy around your age, around your experience, same right shot, used to top 4 minutes, and he automatically gets a really long-term extension.
Yeah.
And Doug Armstrong also has a history of not being afraid.
It's true.
A recent history.
He could have traded Alex Pietrangelo last year, right?
Yeah, well, he totally was going to.
Yeah, he was ready.
So I just think finances and the fact that they're loaded up on right shot D, and there's younger, like a guy like Parayko and
Vince Dunn.
His
power play time was going up.
There's
last
younger
year.
guys coming, and I feel like he did this with David Backes too, and Stastny. Like he's kind of wrapped his head around when you start to get older, and then you want to cash in. Maybe that's the time to move
Don't mess
on.
around.
Not that Falk's super young, but how many of the older right shot D do you want to commit long term to? And if you're Pietrangelo, you want long term. And if he was your guy, why didn't you re-sign him in the summer?
Yeah. All right. What else you got for us?
The other one is that the Oilers will still stink. Maybe that's
maybe that's the note here. You didn't say struggle or scuffle. You said stink.
Yeah, I think they're going to be really bad.
Yeah.
And I feel bad for, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins and Draisaitl and Connor. But I think there's all this hope because they got a new coach, they got a GM, and these guys have great reputations that they're going to start to turn things around. But when you look at their roster beyond that, I still don't think they have the secondary scoring. I still don't think they have the defense. And I'm worried about their goaltending.
Well, the funny thing is, even if they have the first two things you mentioned, even if James Neal pops 33 and the defense is a little better than expected, if they don't get the goaltending, it's probably still not going to be good enough.
Yeah. Like, Koskinen's not it. And then, it's hard to imagine Mike Smith being better than he was last year.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's true.
He was up and down, and he got into a groove. I don't know. I just don't trust that team.
There will be spurts and stretches where one of those goalies, like Mike Smith did last year, just catches fire, right?
Yeah.
And then you'll have a little bit, and then that'll fall away, and maybe you turn back to the other goalie, and there's no guarantee that he's going to follow that up with anything that can sustain it.
He has trouble staying healthy.
Yeah.
And I just don't know. I think over 82 games, it's going to be tough. And I just think you look at the division, I think there's, 4-5 teams better.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Well, not the Kings, but
Do you think Vancouver then finishes better than
Edmonton? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I do too, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then the other one was that something crazy is going to happen in Montreal.
Whoa.
I think there's so much pressure on that team, and they're either going to make a big splash with a trade, like Bergevin's going to get desperate because he's going to feel like his job's in danger. Plus, they actually have cap space and picks that they can be one of the few teams that can be a buyer.
I hear Pietrangelo's available.
Yeah. And I just think they didn't do much in this. Like, they tried. They tried the offer sheet for Aho, but I don't see where the goals are coming. Drouin looks like a mess. I just think that team's going to start to panic because they're going to realize that their best two players, Weber and Price, are getting older. They're not getting enough scoring. The division around them,
Real
like
tough.
Rory's Panthers, have all gotten better.
Real tough.
And so I think they're going to make some headlines mid-season.
All right.
Yeah.
So you got the Leafs in the final. Who are they playing and what's going down?
They're playing the Dallas Stars.
Sexy little pick out there.
Yeah.
I'm big on the work Jim Nill did this summer.
Yeah.
I think getting Joe Pavelski into that room is fantastic. I like their decor. I like that they're still on the rise.
Yeah, there's a few guys there.
And Klingberg.
Hintz.
Yes, Rupe Hintz is
look
fantasy sleeper.
Sure.
Yeah.
If it's not too late for you.
Yeah, if you haven't done your draft. So I think they finally got the secondary scoring. They get a little bit of leadership in Pavelski, which quietly, even though Jamie Benn's a superstar in this league, the sense was that they wanted some maturity and some leadership in that room. That the trade for Andrew Cogliano kind of showed that they were looking to add some more veterans in the mix. I'm not sold on Corey Perry that he can
Low risk bet.
but it's a low risk bet.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just like that team. I like they were one goal away from knocking off St. Louis.
They were that close. There was a Jamie Benn wraparound in that overtime, right? And I think it was Jay Bowmeister's stick was right there and got in the way of it. And then they were that close to going to the West Final. And you could see it turn with Dallas when they got Zuccarello at the trade deadline. He played those first two games, was good, and then broke his arm, and then came back. And their offense kind of took off when they had a secondary scoring line, lo and behold, right? And now that you get Pavelski and Hintz you saw coming along, absolutely. You got two lines now. The defense last year was excellent, going to keep getting better, and a Vezina finalist there and Ben Bishop.
And a good
pieces
duo,
seem
right?
to
Good
be
tandem.
there.
And Bishop, everyone knocks his health and his ability to stay healthy, but Khudobin's like a really
He's only got to play 50.
Yeah, and he's capable of carrying the load if he does get hurt for 3 weeks in a row. You know what I mean? That's an advantage Dallas has over Toronto. Is that number 2 is a solid one.
All right. Well, definitely a team to watch. Luke, you'll be covering the Leafs and the whole league all year. Thanks for stopping by.
Thanks for having me, gents.
All right. That is Sportsnet's Luke Fox. When we come back on the other side of the break, Rory and I will give you our Stanley Cup winners and a few crazy predictions of our own. Stick around for that on Tape to Tape. All right. We are back. Okay, Rory, give me 3 crazy but reasonable thoughts on this coming season.
Okay, Patrick Laine wins the Rocket Richard with at least 55 goals
Okay.
this year. Our fantasy guy, Nick Alberga, always talks about contract years being a big influence in guys to target because they're going to overshoot their production. He's not in a contract year. He's got 2 years, but he is playing for that big next contract, so I think that's going to weigh on him. Anaheim finishes with home ice advantage in round 1 of the playoffs. It's John Gibson, man, and I think Getzlaf is going to be better. I think guys like Raquel, his shooting percentage super low last year. Andre Kasha was on his way to a breakout before injuries hit. He's another guy. Sam Steele, they're one of the best drafting teams in the entire NHL. And now you've got some of these young guys pushing. Still love their defense. And the Pacific just seems kind of wide open to me right now. So that's my second one. And the third one, I couldn't actually do this. I know I just picked Boston to finish third in the Atlantic. I don't feel great about it, but I had to do it because I'm afraid of picking against them. But my bold prediction is that Boston misses the playoffs this year.
I thought I was going crazy putting them fourth. Okay, what do you see happening there?
Yeah, just because Tampa Bay and Toronto are pretty good locks, right? Obviously, I feel good about Montreal if Carey Price has that season. And that means the tough decision of leaving Florida out. So all those teams could potentially finish higher than Boston this year. And that would leave 4 teams from the Metro to get into the playoffs, which we talked about. So I just see that being the potential path. And they've played a ton of hockey over the last few years, right? Eventually, that usually catches up to teams.
I have, speaking of Boston, the Leafs losing in the first round to a team that isn't Boston. This is really just a reminder that, no matter how good you are, and I think the Leafs are fantastic, there's so many other good teams out there.
Yep.
And, look no further than what happened to Tampa Bay last year.
Absolutely.
The Leafs will push and maybe finish first in the Atlantic to get away and then end up drawing an upstart Flyers team or a Florida team that's putting it together, a Bobrovsky wall for 2 weeks.
Yep.
I, too, have a Rocket Richard related one. I was going to say someone other than Ovi. I wasn't willing to go all the way to Laine, just had someone other than Ovechkin. To keep bringing it back to Boston, I kind of wonder if Pasternak's a sneaky bet.
Oh, I like
maybe
it.
That would be, maybe that contravenes our thoughts of them slightly falling down the standings. But that's, I feel like
How about
Austin
Matthews?
Yes, actually, you know what? That's a very likely candidate. I do think he and William Nylander, as we talked about with Luke, are primed to just to go off. I don't think Columbus is going to be a disaster. Part of what I'm putting stock in is we know nothing about goaltending.
Yeah.
So while there's no great body of work with Korpisalo, can we not rhyme off the names of 5 goalies a year?
That's fair. Yep.
And then I just look at the roster and I think, we all know how much you love the hardcores, the tape-to-tape hardcores know Oliver Bjorkstrand is one of your long-running favorites.
Yeah.
A Wenberg bounce back.
Sure.
A Pierre-Luc Dubois step forward. A
Yep.
Seth Jones Norris Trophy.
Yep.
Werenski. They just have horses.
Yep.
They have some guys coming. I just don't think they're going to be a disaster.
That's reasonable.
Yeah. And just
Completely.
for fun, I had Barkov winning the Hart, so...
That one stood out to me.
Yeah.
That means points and Selke contention.
But everyone knows how good he is.
Yep.
And now that he's up in the 95-point range, I just think that campaign could take on a lot of momentum quickly. Okay, so we've given our playoff teams in the East and West.
Yep.
Who do you love in the West, and who do you think is going to emerge as the West winner?
The West is so tough, but I'm once again going with the Vegas Golden Knights.
Yeah.
I love, obviously, their first line, which is the headline line for them with Marchessault and Smith and Carlson, is still very, very good, but I think it's going to be their second best line this year. And if you have, I think we talked about this last episode, Pacioretty or Mark Stone on your fantasy team, I think they're going to have blow up seasons. Cody Aiken as their third line center too is a really great place to be. I think Shea Theodore is going to take a step this year too. The defense is good. It's just a matter of, I think the key for them, if they want to go on a long playoff run, is keep Marc-Andre Fleury's regular season load time low.
Yeah.
Load manage that guy. Keep it below 50 starts, and then he's going to be a little bit more fresh. Out of the East, Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yeah.
This is the year it has to happen with all the uncertainty on the horizon, on the blue line, who they can keep, who they can't keep. This is their best shot.
It is true. I mean, we were
now.
talking with Luke, and I do believe that that the Leafs can find a way to make it work with the defense moving forward, especially if Sandin keeps on the trajectory he is. But you're right. Yeah. You look at it this year, and clearly there is a bit of a, not now or never, that would be crazy to say, but you can draw a big circle around this year where they're going to have Barry Muzzin and to a far less degree Cody Ceci and say, you better make some hay while the sun shines.
And I think the big argument to counter their candidacy for the Stanley Cup this year or Eastern Conference Championship is the amount of new bodies they brought in. But you know who brought in a ton of new bodies last year? The St. Louis Blues, right? Including the Conn Smythe winner, including the goalie who came out of nowhere to correct their whole season. So I don't think that's a knock. Maybe it's just a little bit of a slower start this year than we saw last year, but I think there's too much talent to just get going. So they're also, the Toronto Maple Leafs are my Stanley Cup pick this year.
Bam.
Yeah, I didn't think I was going to do that, but here we are.
Well, I too had Vegas coming out of the West. Though I will say on the predictions, I was jealous of everyone who picked Nashville. I was like, I do kind of like that pick, but it is the balance in Vegas that I like. Yep. I am picking Tampa Bay until they win it. I texted a guy on my hockey team who was giving me grief for not picking the Leafs on Sportsnet.ca, and I said, I'm picking Tampa till they win it, and then if Toronto hasn't won at that point, I'll flip over to the Leafs and pick them. But
odds are,
keep
throwing that talent out.
Oh
right?
My God, keep running
click.
It back. Yeah. Well, there you have it. We are officially in the world where people are picking the Leafs to win the Stanley Cup, and we're not even categorizing that as crazy but reasonable. It's just that could happen. Yep. Man, it's always exciting to be here on the eve of the new season. Thanks so much to Luke for stopping by. Yep. Always a pleasure to have him. You can, of course, catch the Tape to Tape podcast every week. Check it out on iTunes. Go to sportsnet.ca. Follow Rory on Twitter, @Rory Boylan. Myself, Dixon on Sports. And come back next week and all season.